Hey everyone, Hoffman here, and today I wanted to talk about really getting started with your tank. Now, I mentioned in the description this is for fresh and salt water. Obviously, I've got salt water behind me. A lot of you freshwater people are like, I'd like to get into salt water, so I kind of want to talk briefly on that. There's a lot of great videos out there, but the reason I wanted to do this video is because in my comment, there was a comment in my video about putting this tank together, and it's from Roman, and he says, thanks for the video, you're welcome. I'm fully new to the fish game and went into the local shop to get a few tips, and they made it seem super expensive. And they try to sell me on everything. Don't worry, I didn't jump right in. I'm doing my research, smart, before I buy anything. And I was thinking about buying this 15-gallon tank. I'm not looking for anything too crazy as it's going to be my first tank. They told me this tank I could have about 10 fish, such as clownfish, a few others, a starfish, and cleanup crew, as in snails and shrimp. They told me to stay with the live sand and rocks and not to go with coral. Is that a good setup? Do you have a list of other things such as treatment for water that you use? Any water testers? Anything would help. Thanks in advance. So today's video is going to cover this. And in the middle of answering these questions, it's going to be a good one-on-one video about what to think about when you're getting started, especially when we're talking about a smaller tank versus a large one. Because after all, these tanks are less forgiving than this one. Let's talk. First of all, what do I mean when I'm saying it's less forgiving? Well, we're going to talk about that a bit, and as you watch the whole series of 101 videos, you'll understand why. But in a nutshell, if I make a mistake in this tank, there's a lot more water here where it's not going to be an issue as compared to this. I'll give you an example, an extreme example. Let's say that I put my hand in and there's a little bit of soap in my hand, just a tiny bit. Yeah, that can actually still cause some damage, but on this tank, it's going to cause a lot less damage than this tank because there's a lot more water for it to dissolve. But not just that, but there's a lot more room for filtration, a lot more room for air circulation, as opposed to a smaller tank like this. Now, for what I'm talking about, if you understand what I'm talking about, filtration and everything else, watch the video on the nitrifying cycle. That should be later on in this playlist. But let's go ahead and check out and answer each one of Roman's questions one by one. And as everything is answered, it should hopefully kind of give you an idea. First of all, he says that, that they made it seem super expensive. Now, for saltwater, yeah, I'm not going to beat around the bush, but in reality, it's the same thing with freshwater too. You see, I think the issue is that saltwater gets a bad reputation for it being expensive. It's only expensive if you're going to do a reef, really. In reality, if you're doing a saltwater only, a fish only, excuse me. Now, I say a fish only, but you see a couple of corals here, and there's an anemone. But if you're going to do not a reef like this one, it's not going to be terribly more expensive. The problem is that those of you in the freshwater, or those of you that are looking at freshwater, are probably going to PetSmart or Petco or some general store where they just sell you as many of these fish as possible. They just tell you can put a tank, maybe some filtration, a couple of drops of chemical, and you're good. And that could be further from the truth. In some cases, my freshwater tanks have been just as expensive as my saltwater. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about will apply to saltwater and freshwater. The nitrifying cycle, proper filtration. I think the reason the saltwater is just more expensive is because there are more options for a mixed reef, such as dosing, such as better lights. Your traditional freshwater light is not going to do well in salt or for a reef, because it's not going to give you the par. If you know what that is, I'll be doing a video on that too. It's not going to give you the proper color balance, the spectrum that the coral need. Whereas with freshwater, throw a few plants in there, some lights, and you're good to go for the most part. So that's one of the big things is that, yeah, saltwater can be expensive, but you can start off fairly easy. Now, I did say that a tank like this is obviously a lot more forgiving than a 15-gallon. It doesn't mean you can't get started with a 15-gallon, but you need to understand your limitations and what you are able, or what you need to do to be able to keep that alive. So continuing on, let's see, I'm doing research before I buy anything. I was thinking about buying this 15-gallon tank. Now, if you've not seen the video on that, it should be down in the description below. This tank was slightly modified. Not the tank itself, really, but the filtration in it. I did not stick with the standard filtration. I added just a little bit better filtration in there. I have things such as Purigen in there. What I do not have in this tank that I have in here is a protein skimmer. A protein skimmer, I'll do a video on that later too, but a protein skimmer in a nutshell skims the protein, you guys ever been to the beach and you see all the bubbles coming in during tide, it's a lot of protein. It's fish poop. And naturally, those micro bubbles form. It grabs, it binds to those protein particles and brings them up. Well, the protein skimmer, it brings it up and into this little cup. And that's why that cup smells absolutely horrible. This one doesn't have it. And this is proof that you can have a good tank without a protein skimmer. But I also have a very light bioload. Now, what's a bioload? Well, basically your biological load. This can be anything that poops. This is your food. Anything that you put in there that has organic matter. Obviously, number one thing is your fish, your livestock, and all that. Which kind of leads me to this. They told me for this tank I could have about 10 fish. Now, what I just said applies to freshwater and saltwater. And this definitely applies. Any fish store that tells you the following. Oh, you can put 10 fish in a 15-gallon. There's very few exceptions. Bruh. Any store that tells you, oh, it's the 1 inch or the 1 inch per gallon rule, just walk away, get away from those stores. Because the answer is always, it depends. Now, 15, or let's say 10 fish in this tank. Now, in here, I have 4. I've got my 2 clowns, I have an algae plenty, and I've got a diamond watchman goby. That diamond watchman goby is a baby. And once he gets big, he's going to have to go in here. Why? Because that diamond watchman goby can get fairly big. In that case, he's not going to be happy there. Yes, they don't move around, etc., but that's no reason to keep them in there. The reason they're not moving around that much is because they're in a small, cramped tank. I have the ability to move my fish to a bigger tank. The 1 inch per gallon is absolute horse crap. And there's no nicer way of saying it. And here's why. This is a 75-gallon tank. Now, by that logic, I should be able to put a couple of tanks in there. Maybe a powder blue. A powder blue gets to be 1.5 feet. Even, let's say, at only 12 inches, do you really see a 12-inch fish living happy here? Absolutely not. I mean, by that rule, we should be able to get a tarpon and put it in a 55-gallon tank. It just makes no sense. The answer as to how many fish you can put in your tank, it depends on your filtration. Because the filtration on this is not that great. I mean, I've modified it so I know I can do a little bit better. Because I don't have a protein skimmer in there. Because I don't have a full dedicated sump. And there's, you know, the sump or the filter, the sump, and this thing, which is really an overflow, is maybe 5% of the total volume of the tank, as opposed to a 30-gallon sump on a 75-gallon tank with 20 gallons of water in it. This one's going to be a lot more tolerant. Because of that, I don't put that many fish in here. This also applies for freshwater as well. If you have a freshwater tank and you decide to look at those hang-on back filters, you know, those are the filters that hang on the back and the water spills to the front, just throw that in the trash. I'll do a video later as to explaining why eventually, but long story short, the water goes in and it just really skims over the actual sponge. It never really makes full contact. That's why I like the filter that came in here, because it forces the water to go up through the filtration and then out. Those hang-on back filters are trash. If you're a freshwater person, get a canister filter, look into a sump, or make your life easy with a submerged filter such as a Cascade series from Penplax. That's what I have in all my freshwaters as far as my 20 gallons and under, and I absolutely love that filters. It's the same thing with fresh or salt. Your bioload, as far as how many fish you can put in there, oh, it depends how good your filtration is. But the other part is, well, how much room do they have? Just because they survive doesn't mean they thrive. Doesn't mean that they're happy. So make sure that you give plenty of room and really research the individual fish that you're putting in. And it also depends on what you're feeding them as well. You know, a lot of the frozen food out there is going to have a lot of phosphates, a lot of nitrates, depending on what you're putting in there. And sometimes you need to filter that out. If you're feeding just pellet and dry food, that can also mess with the fish after a while if you're buying the cheap crap. And they may be wasting more food than they're actually eating. So now your filter system's working even harder to process not just the fish poop, but also what it's actually eating. Now the other thing is a cleanup crew. A cleanup crew is just that. It's a crew that cleans up. It is not poop eaters. This is mostly the freshwater people that I'm looking at. Oh yeah, no, this fish eat poops. No, there's no such thing.
Hey you, what smells like big business?
Nothing eats poop except bacteria. Bacteria reside in your filtration system, whether that's live rock, your sump, sponges, whatever you've got in there. Again, you really need to watch that video if you don't understand what I'm talking about. Now, the same thing applies for freshwater. When you hear things like, oh yeah, the pleco eats poop. No, plecos don't eat poop. No, catfish don't eat poop. Snails, no, they don't eat poop either. No, they don't. All right? They eat other foods that may eat algae, but they're going to convert that algae into poop. Now, while that may sound like a good thing, algae can be part of your filtration system. So if you're in freshwater and you have a very good filter, that algae is filtering your water. Your snails are going to eat it, convert it to ammonia. Well, what's going to convert that ammonia into nitrites and eventually nitrates when you just got rid of your algae? And that's why it's so important to really consider your filtration system. So if a fish store tells you, LFS, a local fish store tells you that, walk away. Now let's continue on with that madness. I really would love to know what fish store you went to, brother. Let me know. Let's see here. And a few other starfish. No! First of all, starfish on a new tank? No. A lot of starfish are sand sifters. Not all, but a lot of them are. And with a brand new tank, you've got nothing in your sand worth eating. That starfish is going to starve itself. And in reality, a tank this size is never going to keep a starfish happy. I've got a couple conch snails in there. Conch snails are awesome because they do sift through the sand. They eat everything. But in reality, a cleanup crew on day one, I've been through there. Don't. You're going to lose a lot of your cleanup crew because there's nothing for them to eat. Even as you go through the algae part of your cycle, the last few parts where you go into diatom and algae, it's not enough really that your snails are going to eat. It may not necessarily be the kind of algae that your snails want to eat. The freshwater thing, or saltwater, excuse me, it's the same way. We don't want to throw snails in there until we really need them. Freshwater is a little easier because if you do get snails and you see them starving, which you really don't know until they die, but if you see that there's nothing for them to eat, you can put a cucumber and call it a day. I am not putting a cucumber in a saltwater tank. But yeah, starfish, terrible idea. There's no reason for you to put a starfish in a 15-gallon tank. Now, I'm only saying this because somebody posted this on one of the forums about oh, I got some itty-bitty starfish, those asterinas. No, those are terrible starfish to multiply like crazy. And if you want to get coral in there, some of them will attack your coral. So just don't even mess with starfish if you're going to look at a smaller tank. Now, as far as water treatment, this is a great question because for saltwater, the answer is not a damn thing. And I don't mean just put tap water, but you don't use tap water, anything out of your phosphates. Saltwater is really picky with your phosphates and silicates, which will come out of your faucet. If you want coral, and you can grow coral in a small tank, heck, you can grow coral in a freaking jar if you have everything right, and we'll cover that in a second, but you can grow coral in this, but you're not going to do any kind of water treatments like you would for fresh water. For saltwater, you need reverse osmosis DI, so RODI water. You have to properly mix it and all that, and there's lots of great videos out there. If you want, I'll be happy to do one directly explaining that part, but that's really what you need to do. There's no chemical in here as far as dechlorinators or anything like that. You should still have Prime handy because you never know if you have a tank issue where you need to quickly detoxify something. What is Prime? I'm so glad you asked because that is something for fresh and salt water, and my freshwater people, you need to listen to this. When you go to the fish store, you're going to see all the little yellow bottles, different colored bottles, right? It's like $8 to $10 for each one, and you put a capful for every 10 gallons. Don't do any of that. Because what you're going to do is you're going to spend a crap load of money for a semi-effective product. Now, this is what I did. There's a product called Prime by Seachem. Now, if you're already if you've already done this for a while, you know what I'm talking about here. But don't buy the little teeny tiny bottles. Get the 2-liter bottle. It's like $40. And that sounds a lot like for dechlorinator, but for every 10 gallons that you put in there, it's only 1 milliliter. So I need to tell you that 2 liters is going to last you a heck of a long time. As a matter of fact, a 2-liter bottle has lasted me so far a year, and I've got 16 tanks. Now, granted, the saltwater ones, it really doesn't matter because I'm not putting Prime in them. But as far as the fresh water, I've got the pond, I've got a 55, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 10-gallon bettas, the 10-gallon puffer, the 8-gallon nano, the 20-gallon betta, and then the puffer. And while the puffer is a brackish, the big puffer, it's 30 long, while that one is a brackish, that one I do use Prime because I'm not growing any corals in there. I'm not worried about that. The phosphates and silicates don't hurt that tank. So that's fine for that. But what's happening is basically, while that little $8 bottle may last you a month or two, this thing's going to last you years. If you only have one tank, a 2-liter bottle, this thing's going to last you forever. Well, how about when it expires? It doesn't expire according to CChem. So prime. That's what you should do. If you're doing freshwater, you need to do water changes. I don't care what your argument is, just do some damn water changes, because unless you're going to sit there and fine-tune a perfect formula, and the freshwater tools are nothing like saltwater tools. I literally have a thing here called the Apex, a Trident. It measures everything constantly. It gives me all parameters. Stuff like that for freshwater doesn't really exist to that capacity. So just do water changes, plus if there's ever an error, the nice change in water will get rid of what may be floating in there that shouldn't be floating in there. But prime will definitely take care of that. It detoxifies ammonia, detoxifies nitrite and nitrates. If you have too much, instead of doing a massive water change, if you may not be able to, you can easily just put a bit of nitrate while you get the stuff taken care of. All the other crap you really don't need. If you are looking for a betta, and I love bettas, I got several of them. The betta conditioner is for people that keep them in a little bowl. First of all, you're going to keep betta in a bowl, just don't bother doing that. Just go, put the betta back in the store, and don't do it. 10-gallon tank, nothing less. Some people do fine in a 5-gallon, 10-gallon tank, because the money that you spend on a 5-gallon, you could have done in a 10, and the 10 is going to be a lot easier in the long run. Trust me on this. You're still going to need the same amount of filtration. You're going to need the same type of heater, so you might as well make your betta happy at a 10-gallon. Trust me, it'll be better this way. With all that being said, if you've got the proper filtration, if you've got the heater and all that, you don't need that water conditioner, because you don't. You've got a proper natural habitat for betta fish. I did a video on that already, so make sure you watch that. So I believe that covers all of his questions. Let's see here if I missed anything else. Any water testers? Okay, so the last part is for freshwater. I do use API. Unhappily, API is inaccurate as hell, and I will do a whole different thing about testers later on. For the most part, for saltwater, I use Salford, but I use my Trident in there. My Apex is inside here. So that all tests for me automatically. For my salinity, I use the Hannah checker. I just stay away from API in general for anything saltwater. For freshwater, you're kind of stuck with API. CChem does sell, at least for the beginning stages of your tank, they do so what's called the ammonia alert. We'll do a video on that part later on, because you really do not need to know your ammonia constantly. But there are testers out there. Salford, they do make some freshwater ones. Hannah makes some freshwater ones. So if you got the money, you want it a little bit easier, go with the Hannah. If you want something nice and quick, it's API, but it's not accurate. If you're looking at those little strips, throw those strips in the garbage, because they're not going to help you in any way, shape, or form, especially for saltwater. The most important part is test weekly, test often, especially for when you get into corals and all that. Now, Roman, the last thing is when you want to get into corals, not yet, not anytime soon. Wait till you get a nice established tank, I would say 6 to 8 months without any major issues, and then you should be ready. The answer is always it depends, but it's very important for you to find a trusted saltwater store that they know what they're talking about. And that store you walk to is out to make a quick buck. Because 10 fish in that gallon, they're gonna die, and you're gonna continue going back there to buy stuff. They just, and I say this nicely, they saw a new person they see as a sucker and they're trying to make money. Walk away from there, don't buy from them again. So that's a quick video. Again, there's going to be a lot more expanding what I talked about. If that helped you, please make sure to hit the thumbs up, hit the bell, subscribe, and most importantly, leave a comment below. Thanks so much for watching. Good night, and God bless.